If someone had told me that the people I trusted most would one day become my cruelest enemies, I wouldn't have believed it. If they'd whispered that the family I married into would throw me out like garbage when I needed them most, I would have laughed and called them crazy. But life has a way of teaching you lessons you never signed up for. And mine taught me that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people sitting at your dinner table. My name is Eleanor, though most folks these days just call me Grandma Elle. I'm 73 years old now, and my bones ache on cold mornings, but my memory, sharp as ever, especially when it comes to the story I'm about to tell you. It's a story I've kept mostly to myself for decades, sharing only pieces with my daughter when she was old enough to understand. But now, sitting here in my little house with my tea getting cold and the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, I think it's time the whole truth came out. This is the story of how I lost everything and found myself in the process. I grew up in a small town in Northern California, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business and Sunday dinners were sacred. My parents ran a modest grocery store on Main Street, and I spent my childhood helping stock shelves and chatting with customers. Life was simple, predictable, and safe. I was the youngest of 3 daughters, and while my sisters dreamed of big cities and glamorous lives, I was content right where I was. That all changed the summer I turned 19. His name was Thomas Mitchell, and he walked into my father's store on a Tuesday afternoon in July 1971, looking for directions to the hardware shop down the street. He was 22, tall, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and he had the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. He wore work boots covered in dust and had paint stains on his jeans. Later, I'd learn he'd just gotten a job at the construction company 2 towns over and was trying to fix up the small house he'd rented. "You must be new around here," I said, leaning against the counter with what I hoped was a casual smile. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed, and the sound filled the whole store. "I'm Thomas. Just moved from Oregon." "Eleanor," I replied, "but everyone calls me Elle." He bought a Coke and a candy bar that day, but he came back the next day for bread. Then the day after that for milk. By the end of the week, my father was giving me knowing looks, and my mother was asking if that nice young man was single. Thomas courted me the old-fashioned way. He'd pick me up after my shift at the store, and we'd drive out to the lake where we'd sit on the hood of his beat-up Chevrolet and talk for hours. He told me about his family back in Oregon, his parents who ran a small farm, his older sister who'd married and moved to Seattle, and his younger brother, David, who was still in high school and wild as a March hare, as Thomas put it. "David's the smart one," Thomas said one evening, skipping stones across the water. "Always has his nose in a book. He's going to be something big someday, probably a lawyer or a doctor. Me, I'm just a guy who's good with his hands." "There's nothing just about that," I told him, and I meant it. Thomas had a way of building things, fixing things, making the broken whole again. I didn't know then how much I'd need that quality in the years to come. 6 months later, on a crisp December evening with snow threatening in the air, Thomas got down on one knee in front of the Christmas tree in my parents' living room. The ring was small, a simple silver band with a tiny diamond butt. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Elle, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. We got married in the spring of 1972 in the little church where I'd been baptized. It was a small wedding, just family and close friends, but it was perfect. My mother cried. My father gave a toast about how Thomas better treat me right or he'd answer to him, and everyone danced until the band packed up and went home. For our honeymoon, we drove up to Oregon so I could meet Thomas's family. I was nervous, desperately so. Thomas talked about his parents with such reverence, and I wanted to make a good impression. I wore my best dress, practiced my smile in the car mirror, and rehearsed polite conversation topics in my head. The Mitchell farm was beautiful, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. The house was large and sturdy, painted white with green shutters, and there was a big wraparound porch where Thomas's mother, Margaret, was waiting for us. "You must be Eleanor," she said, coming down the steps with her arms open. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her hug was brief but warm. "Thomas has told us so much about you." His father Robert was a quiet man with Thomas's same build and a firm handshake. "Welcome to the family," he said simply, and I felt a flutter of relief. They seemed kind, normal, welcoming. And then there was David. He was 17 then. on the cusp of graduating high school, and he looked like a younger, leaner version of Thomas. But where Thomas's eyes were warm and open, David's were calculating, always watching, always assessing. He stood at the top of the porch steps, hands in his pockets, and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. "So you're the girl who stole my brother's heart," he said, coming down to shake my hand. His grip was firmer than necessary, held a beat too long. "Hope you know what you're getting into, marrying into this family." Thomas laughed and clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Don't scare her off before she's even had Mom's pot roast." But something in David's tone made my stomach tighten, just for a moment. I brushed it off, chalked it up to nerves and being in a new place. How could I have known that this 17-year-old kid would become the architect of my destruction? We stayed for 3 days. Margaret showed me family photo albums and shared recipes. Robert took Thomas and me out to see the property, pointing out where he planned to plant new crops come spring. David was mostly absent, either at school or locked away in his room studying. When he was around, he was charming enough, asking me questions about California, about my family, about what I wanted to do with my life. "I'm just going to be a wife and mother," I said at dinner one night, smiling at Thomas across the table. David made a small sound, not quite a scoff, but close. "That's it. No ambitions beyond that." "David," Margaret said sharply, "that's enough." "I just mean she seems smart," he said, holding up his hands defensively. "Seems like a waste to just ... settle." Thomas's jaw tightened, but I reached over and squeezed his hand. "It's not settling if it's what you want," I said calmly, "and being a mother is about the most ambitious thing I can think of." David shrugged and went back to his dinner, but I caught him watching me later that evening, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite name. It made me uncomfortable, but I told myself I was being silly. He was just a kid, after all. Thomas and I settled into married life back in California. We rented a small apartment above the hardware store, and Thomas continued working construction while I kept my job at my father's grocery. We were happy in that simple, uncomplicated way that young couples are when the world still feels full of possibilities. We talked about having children, about eventually buying a little house with a yard, about growing old together and watching grandkids play on a porch we'd build ourselves. Thomas would come home covered in sawdust and paint, and I'd have dinner waiting. We'd eat on our tiny balcony in the summer evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You know what?" Thomas said one night, his arm around my shoulders as we sat watching the stars come out. "I think I'm the luckiest man alive." "Oh yeah, why's that?" "Because I get to come home to you every single day." He kissed the top of my head. "No matter how hard the work is, no matter what goes wrong, I know you're here. That's everything." I leaned into him, feeling safer than I'd ever felt in my life. "I love you, Thomas Mitchell." "Love you more, Eleanor Mitchell." If I'd known then what was coming, would I have held him tighter? Would I have tried to freeze that moment in time, preserve it like a photograph so I could return to it when everything fell apart? Maybe, but we never know which moments are our last peaceful ones until they're already gone. 2 years into our marriage, we got a phone call that would change everything. It was Margaret, and she was crying. "It's David," she said, her voice breaking up over the line. "He's been accepted to the university in San Francisco, but we can't afford the housing. The dorms are so expensive, and we're already stretched thin with the farm struggling this year." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I could see him thinking, calculating, weighing options. "What are you asking, Mom? Could he stay with you? Just for the first year? Maybe 2. He could get a part-time job, help with expenses. He wouldn't be any trouble, I promise." I watched my husband's face, saw the conflict there. Our apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, a cramped living room, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. Adding a third person, especially a 19-year-old college student, would mean giving up our privacy, our space, our quiet evenings on the balcony. But this was family, and family helped each other. "Of course he can stay," Thomas said finally, and Margaret's sob of relief was audible even to me standing several feet away. "We'll make it work." After he hung up, Thomas pulled me close. "I'm sorry, Elle. I know this isn't what we planned." "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. "It's just temporary. We'll manage." David arrived 3 weeks later with 2 suitcases and a chip on his shoulder the size of Oregon. He'd filled out since I'd last seen him, grown into his frame, and he carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. At 19, He was already strikingly handsome, with Thomas's dark hair and the smile that could charm the birds from the trees. "Thanks for taking me in," he said, but there was something in his tone that made it sound less like gratitude and more like, we owed him this. We gave him the living room, bought a fold-out couch that became his bed, and tried to adjust to having another person in our small space. Thomas was gone most days working, and I'd cut back my hours at the store, so it was often just David and me in the apartment. At first, it was fine. He'd study at the small kitchen table while I cooked or cleaned. He was polite, mostly kept to himself, and on weekends he'd go out with friends he'd made at the university. But slowly, gradually, things began to shift. It started with small things, comments that seemed innocent on the surface but had an edge to them. "That dress looks nice on you, Elle," he'd say, his eyes traveling up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. "Thomas is a lucky man." Or when I'd be washing dishes, he'd come up behind me to get a glass from the cabinet, standing closer than necessary, his arm brushing against mine. "Excuse me," he'd murmur, but he'd linger a beat too long. I told myself I was imagining it. He was young, probably didn't realize he was being inappropriate. This was Thomas's little brother. For heaven's sake, I was being paranoid. But the incidents increased. He'd walk around the apartment in just his boxers in the morning. Even after I'd asked him to please put on a robe, he'd make comments about how Thomas worked such long hours. "Must be hard for me to be alone so much. I was too pretty to be by myself." "David, that's not appropriate," I finally said one afternoon after he'd made yet another comment about my appearance. He held up his hands, that charming smile sliding into place. "I'm just being nice, Elle. Just complimenting you. Thomas never seems to anymore." "That's not true." "Isn't it though?" He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "When's the last time he took you out, or bought you flowers?" "He's always working, always tired. I'm just saying you deserve better attention than you're getting." "I think you should go study," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "and I think you need to respect the boundaries of this household." He shrugged and walked away, but I could feel his eyes on me as he left. That night, when Thomas came home, exhausted from a double shift, I almost told him. The words were right there, perched on my tongue, ready to spill out. But what would I say? "Your brother looks at me strangely. He stands too close sometimes. He makes comments that make me uncomfortable." It all sounded so vague, so potentially innocent, and Thomas loved his brother, looked up to him, even proud of David's intelligence and academic success. I didn't want to cause problems over what might just be my own sensitivity, so I swallowed the words and kissed my husband. "Hello," instead. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in October. I remember because the leaves had just started to turn, and there was a chill in the air that promised winter was coming. Thomas had taken an extra shift, wouldn't be home until after 9. David had told me he had evening classes and would be out late. I'd taken the opportunity to have a long bath, something I rarely got to do with 3 people sharing one bathroom. I was in my nightgown and robe, my hair wrapped in a towel, when I came out and found David sitting on our couch. "I thought you had class," I said, pulling my robe tighter. "Got cancelled." He was watching me with an intensity that made my heart start to pound. "Professor sick." "Oh well, I was just about to go to bed early. Read a bit, don't let me stop you." But he didn't move, didn't look away. I started toward our bedroom, and he stood up. "Elle, wait." Everything in me screamed to keep walking, to lock the bedroom door behind me, but I was still trying to be polite, still trying to convince myself this was all in my head. I stopped and turned. "What is it?" He crossed the distance between us in 3 steps, and suddenly he was right there, invading my space, his hand coming up to touch my cheek. "You're so beautiful. Do you know that Thomas doesn't appreciate you the way he should?" "David, stop." I tried to step back, but I was against the wall now. "This isn't you. Can't what?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Can't tell you the truth. Can't see what's right in front of me. You're wasted on my brother, Elle. He works all the time, barely talks to you, barely touches you. But I see you. I've always seen you." Then he kissed me. I shoved him away with all my strength, and he stumbled backward, surprise flashing across his face. "Don't you ever touch me again," I said, my voice shaking with rage and fear and disgust. "I'm married to your brother." "Your brother? What's wrong with you?" For a moment, something ugly flickered across his features, anger, embarrassment, something darker I couldn't name. Then his expression smoothed out, and he smiled, that charming smile. "Come on, Elle. You can't tell me you haven't felt it too. The connection between us." "There is no connection," I said, my hands clenched into fists. You're going to pack your things and leave tonight, and we're never going to speak of this again. His smile disappeared. You think Thomas will believe you if you tell him his perfect little wife tried to seduce his brother? My blood went cold. That's not what happened, isn't it? Who's he going to believe? His brother, who's trying to make something of himself, get an education, or his wife, who's been alone with me every afternoon for months? He stepped closer again, but I held my ground. You tell him anything, and I'll destroy you. I'll tell him you've been coming on to me since I got here. I'll tell my parents, and they'll believe me too. After all, I'm family. Blood, you're just, The wife, I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in. Get out of my sight. He shrugged and walked to his section of the apartment, and I ran to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the floor with my back against it, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. When Thomas came home that night, David was all smiles and charm, asking about his day, offering to make him a sandwich. I stayed in the bedroom, pretending to be asleep, tears soaking into my pillow. For 3 days, I wrestled with what to do. David acted like nothing had happened, continuing to be polite in front of Thomas, while shooting me warning looks when my husband's back was turned. I felt trapped, suffocated, imprisoned in my own home. I had to tell Thomas. That was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. Our marriage was built on honesty and trust, and keeping this secret felt like poison spreading through my body. On Sunday evening, after David had left to go to the library, I sat Thomas down at our small kitchen table. My hands were shaking as I took his, and he looked at me with concern. What's wrong? You've been acting strange all week. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. Can you do that? He nodded, his face serious now. Of course. So I told him everything. The uncomfortable comments, the lingering looks, the way David stood too close, walked around inappropriately dressed. And then I told him about Thursday night, about the kiss I didn't want, about David's threats. With each word, I watched my husband's face change. First there was confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like anger, but not at David, at me. He kissed you, Thomas said slowly when I finished. Yes. I pushed him away immediately. Thomas, I swear to you, I did nothing to encourage. Did anyone see this happen? What? No, we were alone. But so it's just your word against his. I felt like he'd slapped me. Thomas, I'm your wife. Why would I lie about something like this? He pulled his hands away from mine, stood up, started pacing the small kitchen. David's 19 years old. He's a kid. He's here trying to get an education, trying to make something of himself. He's not a kid, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe you misunderstood his intentions. Maybe he was just being friendly, and you took it the wrong way. He kissed me, Thomas. He threatened me. There's no misunderstanding that, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to believe me. Believing me meant accepting that his little brother, the boy he'd helped raise, was capable of betrayal. It meant his family wasn't perfect. It meant everything was complicated. I think you need to apologize to David, Thomas said finally, and my world tilted on its axis. Apologize? For what? For leading him on, for making him think there was something between you. I never. Thomas, how can you say that? I'm your wife, and he's my brother. Thomas's voice rose, something that rarely happened. He's family, blood. You're asking me to believe he's some kind of monster, and I just. I can't. There has to be some explanation. I stood there, staring at the man I'd married, the man I'd thought I knew, and realized I was completely alone. If you don't believe me, I said quietly, then we have nothing. Don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you the truth, and you're calling me a liar. Thomas ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. I'm not calling you a liar. I just think maybe you're confused, or upset about something else. Or, get out, I said. What? Get out. Go sleep on your brother's couch. Go be with your precious family, but don't sleep in that bed with me tonight. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the moment he made his choice. Without another word, he grabbed his pillow and left the bedroom. That night, I cried harder than I'd ever cried in my life, and I didn't know then, but the worst was still to come. David, of course, played his part perfectly. When Thomas confronted him, the next I heard them talking in low voices in the living room. He acted shocked, hurt, confused. I don't know why she'd say that. Tommy, I heard him say, using the nickname only family used. I mean, she's beautiful, yeah, but she's my sister. I would never. God, Do you think I did something to make her think I was interested? I was just trying to be nice, be friendly, you know? I know, kid, I know. Is she okay? Maybe she's stressed about something. I don't know. Do you think she might need to see someone, a doctor or something? They were doing it, right there in my own home. They were painting me as crazy, as unstable, as the problem. And Thomas was letting it happen. But the real nightmare began when David called his parents. Margaret and Robert drove down that same week, saying they were worried about the family and wanted to get to the bottom of things. I knew the moment I saw Mark's face that David had already told his version of events. We all sat in that cramped living room, me on one side, the Mitchell family lined up on the other like a tribunal. Thomas wouldn't look at me. David wore an expression of sad concern. Margaret's face was cold as stone. Only Robert looked uncomfortable, like he wished he was anywhere else. Eleanor, Margaret began, her voice measured and controlled. David has told us about your accusations. We wanted to hear your side. They're not accusations, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They're the truth. David made inappropriate advances toward me, and when I rejected him, he threatened me. Why would he do that? Margaret asked. What reason would he have? I don't know. You'd have to ask him. We did ask him, Robert said quietly. He says he was nothing but respectful to you. He's lying. Margaret's eyes hardened. My son does not lie. Well, someone is, I shot back, and it's not me. Eleanor, we've known David his entire life, Margaret continued. He's a good boy, a smart boy. He's never been in trouble, never shown any sign of the kind of behavior you're describing. Maybe you don't know him as well as you think you do. That was the wrong thing to say. Margaret stood up, her face flushed with anger. How dare you? You come into this family, and after only 2 years you think you can turn us against each other. Think you can make accusations against my son. I'm not trying to turn anyone against anyone. I'm trying to tell you the truth. The truth, Margaret said coldly, is that you're a jealous, attention-seeking girl who can't handle not being the center of attention. David comes here, gets into a good university, starts building a future for himself, and you can't stand it. So you make up these lies to destroy him. I looked at Thomas, pleading with my eyes for him to defend me, to stand by me, to be my husband, but he just sat there, staring at his hands. Thomas, I said, please. Maybe you did misunderstand, he said finally, and those 5 words broke my heart into pieces. Maybe we all need some space to cool down. Space, I repeated. Your brother assaulted me, and you want space. He didn't assault you, Margaret snapped, and if you continue to make these slanderous claims, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. The room spun. Legal action. They were threatening to sue me for telling the truth about what their son had done. I want all of you out of my home, I said, standing up on shaking legs. Now, it's not your home, Margaret said coldly. It's my son's home. Thomas is the one on the lease. You're just the wife. Just the wife. The same words David had used. That night, I packed a bag and left. I went to my parents' house, sobbing so hard I could barely explain what had happened. My mother held me while my father raged about the Mitchell family, about Thomas's cowardice, about how I should divorce him immediately, but I couldn't. Despite everything, I still loved him. I kept hoping he'd come to his senses, realize he'd chosen the wrong side. Come back to me. He'd end single quotes. 2 weeks later, I got the news that would change everything. I was pregnant. I drove back to the apartment, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Maybe this would fix everything. Maybe knowing we were going to have a baby would remind Thomas of what was important, of who we were to each other. I found him alone, David apparently at class. Thomas, I said, we need to talk. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't been sleeping. Are you ready to apologize? To make this right? Apologize, Thomas. I have nothing to apologize for, but I have something to tell you. I took his hand, placed it on my still flat stomach. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. For a moment, his face lit up with joy. Then something shifted, and he pulled his hand away. How do I know it's mine? The floor fell out from under me. What did you say? If what you say about David is truth, that he was interested in you, that something happened, how do I know you didn't encourage it? How do I know this baby is mine? I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The man I loved, the man I'd married, was questioning whether I'd cheated on him with his own brother. Get out, I finally managed. Get out, and don't come back. I said, get out. He left, and I sank to the floor, my hands on my belly, and sobbed. But But the nightmare wasn't over. 3 days later, I received divorce papers. Thomas was leaving me, taking David's side, choosing his family over me, and the papers demanded I vacate the apartment within 30 days. I was pregnant, heartbroken, and about to be homeless. My parents wanted me to come home, but I couldn't. Couldn't go back to that small town where everyone would whisper and stare and gossip. Couldn't face the shame and judgment. So I took what little money I had saved and moved to a different city, 2 hours away, where no one knew me. And that's when the final blow came. Thomas died. A construction accident, they said. A scaffolding collapse. He was killed instantly, along with 2 other workers. I got the call from Margaret, her voice brittle with grief and anger. "I hope you're happy," she said. "He died heartbroken because of your lies. You killed my son." Then she hung up. I wasn't allowed at the funeral. Margaret made that clear through her lawyer. If I showed up, they'd have me arrested for trespassing. So I stayed home in my tiny apartment, one hand on my growing belly, and mourned alone. The insurance money, the death benefits, everything went to Thomas's family. As his estranged wife in the process of divorce, I got nothing. Margaret made sure of that. I was 23 years old, pregnant, widowed, and completely alone. What followed was the hardest period of my life. To reach 10,000 words and truly capture this journey, I need to tell you about the details, the daily struggle that too many stories gloss over. I lived in a studio apartment in a rundown building where the heat barely worked and cockroaches skittered across the floor at night. I worked 3 jobs while pregnant, waitressing at a diner during lunch shift, cleaning offices at night, and doing piecework sewing at home whenever I could. My feet swelled so badly I could barely put on shoes. My back ached constantly. I was exhausted all the time, existing on crackers and whatever leftovers I could sneak from the diner, putting every penny toward rent and saving for the baby. The other waitress, Carmen, was the first person who showed me kindness. She was older, maybe 50, with grown kids of her own. She noticed I was pregnant and started slipping me extra food. "You're eating for 2, she'd say, handing me a plate of the daily special. "And you look like you haven't had a good meal in weeks." "I can't afford." "Did I ask you for money?" "Eat." Carmen became my first real friend in that city. She didn't ask many questions, didn't pry into why a pregnant girl was working herself to death with no husband in sight. She just helped, quietly and consistently. The nights were the worst, lying alone in that tiny apartment, feeling the baby kick, wondering how I was going to do this. The baby's father was dead, his family hated me, and I had no one. The weight of it would press down on my chest until I couldn't breathe, until I'd cry so hard I'd make myself sick. But I couldn't give up. There was a life growing inside me, depending on me. I had to survive, had to be strong. The baby came on a cold January morning. I'd gone into labor during my night shift cleaning offices, my water breaking while I was scrubbing a bathroom floor. Carmen's number was my emergency contact, and she met me at the county hospital. Labor lasted 14 hours, 14 hours of pain with no husband to hold my hand. No mother-in-law to tell me I was doing well, no family waiting in the lobby. Just Carmen, sitting beside me, letting me squeeze her hand until I thought I'd break it. "You can do this," she kept saying. "You're stronger than you know." At 6:47 a.m., my daughter was born, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and Thomas's brown eyes. The nurse placed her in my arms, and I fell in love instantly and completely. "Hello, Sarah," I whispered, the name I'd chosen months ago. "I'm your mama, and I promise him, going to give you the best life I can." The first years of Sarah's life were a blur of sleepless nights, constant worry, and fierce determination. I couldn't afford childcare, so I wore her in a sling while I worked my sewing jobs at home. When she got older, Carmen would watch her during my diner shifts, refusing payment. "I remember what it was like," Carmen would say, "being young and struggling. Someone helped me once. Now I'm helping you." I made sure Sarah never went without, even if that meant I did. She had clothes secondhand but clean and mended. She had toys from garage sales and thrift stores. She had books from the library, which became our sanctuary. Every Saturday, I'd walk Sarah to the library, and we'd spend hours there. It was free, it was warm in winter, and cool in summer, and it was full of magic. I'd read to her until my voice was hoarse, doing all the character voices, making her giggle. "Again, Mama," she'd say when I finished a story. "Read it again," and I would, every single time. Money was always tight. There were nights I'd lie awake doing math in my head, trying to figure out how to make $30 stretch across groceries, bus fare, and the electric bill. There were times I'd stand in the grocery store, choosing between buying myself a loaf of bread or getting Sarah an extra carton of milk. She always got the milk. I never told her about her father. Not really. How do you explain to a child that her daddy is dead but his family wanted nothing to do with her, that they blamed me for his death, that somewhere out there, she had grandparents and an uncle who would cross the street to avoid us? Where's my daddy? She asked once when she was 5, after seeing other kids with their fathers at the park. He's in heaven, baby, I told her, which was true enough. But he loved you very much, and he'd be so proud of you. Do I look like him? You have his eyes, I said, touching her cheek. His beautiful brown eyes. Will I ever meet my grandparents? That question felt like a knife in my chest. Someday, I lied. Maybe someday, when Sarah started kindergarten, I finally had enough time to take a full-time job. I got hired as a secretary at a small law firm. And while the pay wasn't great, it was steady and came with health insurance. Real health insurance, not the free clinic where we'd been going for years. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was a kind man in his 60s who'd built his practice on helping ordinary people with ordinary problems. He noticed I was bright, that I picked things up quickly, and he started teaching me more than just typing and filing. You ever think about going to college, Eleanor? He asked me one day. I laughed, but it came out bitter. With what time and what money? Night school. I'd be willing to adjust your hours, let you leave early a couple days a week, and there are grants, loans. I have a daughter to raise. I know, but maybe raising her includes showing her that it's never too late to improve yourself, to chase a dream. I thought about it for weeks. The idea of going back to school at 27 seemed impossible, but slowly, impossibly, I started to believe maybe I could do it. So I enrolled in community college, taking 2 classes at a time while working full-time and raising Sarah. I studied after she went to bed, typed papers during my lunch break, and drank enough coffee to float a battleship. Sarah would sit at the kitchen table doing her homework while I did mine. Sometimes she'd help me with my math, reading the problems aloud while I washed dishes. Sometimes I'd help her with reading, and we'd make flashcards together. You're the smartest mama in the world, she told me once, and I had to turn away so she wouldn't see my tears. It took me 6 years, going part-time, but one finally graduated with an associate's degree in business administration. Sarah was 11, and she sat in the audience at my graduation wearing her best dress, clapping louder than anyone when they called my name. I'm so proud of you, Mama, she said afterward, hugging me tight. I'm proud of us, I told her. We did this together. That degree got me a better job, then an even better one. By the time Sarah was in high school, we'd moved out of that cramped studio into a real 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. She had her own room for the first time in her life, and I cried watching her decorate it with posters and string lights. We still didn't have much, but we had enough, and we had each other. Every achievement of Sarah's life was bittersweet. I was so proud of her, so grateful to witness her growing up, but there was always an empty chair next to mine, always a missing presence that should have been there. Her first school play sheet was a sunflower in the class production. With a costume I'd stayed up all night sewing. I sat alone in the audience while other kids had both parents cheering. When Sarah took her bow, she looked right at me and waved, and I waved back with tears streaming down my face. Her first dance recital, her elementary school graduation, the science fair where she won 2nd place with a project on solar energy, her first day of high school, standing on our apartment steps in clothes we'd carefully budgeted for, looking so grown up I could barely stand it. Take my picture, Mama, she'd say, and I would, storing each moment like a treasure, because these were all I had. The other mothers at school events would cluster together, chatting and laughing, and I'd stand apart. Some tried to be friendly, but there was always that question lurking behind their eyes. Where's her father? Why are you alone? I made a few friends over the years. Carmen, of course, who remained a constant in our lives, becoming the grandmother Sarah never had. There was Rita from the law firm, who invited us to her family's Thanksgivings when she learned we had nowhere to go, and Mr. Henderson, who gave Sarah her first job filing papers after school when she was 16 and needed money for college savings. These people became our family, the one we chose rather than the one we were born into, but there were still moments that cut deep. Parent-teacher conferences where the teacher would ask about Sarah's father, and I'd have to explain he was deceased. Father-daughter dances at school that Sarah pretended not to care about, but I knew she did. Career days where other kids brought their dads, and Sarah brought her mom in a borrowed suit, talking about being a legal secretary. "I wish I had a dad," she said once when she was 13, going through that difficult phase where everything felt unfair. "I know, baby, I wish you did too. Do you think he would have loved me?" "I know he would have," I said, and that at least was true. Whatever Thomas had done, whatever he believed, I knew he would have loved his daughter. "You're very easy to love." Sarah was brilliant, not just mother's pride. She really was exceptional. She excelled in school, particularly in math and science, and by high school, she was taking advanced placement classes and talking about becoming an engineer. "An engineer, Mama," she'd say, her eyes bright with excitement. "I could design buildings, or bridges, or maybe work in aerospace. Imagine that. You can do anything you set your mind to," I told her, and I meant it. But college was expensive. Even with her grades, even with scholarships, there would be costs we couldn't cover. So I took on extra work, freelance bookkeeping in the evenings after my regular job. Sarah worked too, not just at Mr. Henderson's office but also tutoring younger students and working weekend shifts at the library. We saved every penny, skipped movies and restaurants and new clothes, made do with what we had. And slowly, painfully slowly, the college fund grew. The day Sarah got her acceptance letter from the state university with a partial scholarship, we both screamed so loud, the neighbors complained. We danced around our little apartment, laughing and crying and hugging each other. "I'm going to college," she kept saying, like she couldn't believe it. "I'm actually going to college." "You earned it," I told her. "Every bit of it." The day I dropped her off at the dorms, I helped her unpack, met her roommate, made her bed with the new sheets we'd bought from Target. She was 18, the same age I'd been when I met her father, but she seemed so much younger, so innocent and hopeful and full of dreams. "You're going to be okay without me?" she asked as I prepared to leave. "Am I going to be okay?" I laughed. "Sarah Mitchell, I'm supposed to ask you that. I know, but you've never been alone before." "Not really. You've always had me." I pulled her into a tight hug. "I'm going to be fine, better than fine. I'm going to be proud, watching you become the woman I always knew you'd be. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby girl. Now go, make us proud. Make yourself proud." I cried the whole 2-hour drive home, and when I walked into our apartment that evening, it felt empty in a way it never had before. Sarah's room was neat and organized, waiting for her visits home. The kitchen was too quiet without her laughter and chatter, but I wasn't sad, not really. This was what I'd worked for. This was the whole point, to give her a life better than mine. To give her opportunities and choices and freedom. I'd done it. Against all odds, I'd raised my daughter alone, and she was thriving. Sarah graduated summa cum laude 4 years later with a degree in mechanical engineering. She'd landed a job at a prestigious firm in the city, starting the week after graduation with a salary that made my head spin. "Mama, look at this," she said, showing me the offer letter. "This is real money. Good money. We're going to be okay now. Better than okay. We've always been okay," I reminded her. "I know, but now I can take care of you for once. Let me do that." She insisted on buying me a car, a used but reliable Honda that meant I didn't have to take the bus anymore. She started sending me money every month, even though I protested. She took me out to dinner at nice restaurants where I felt out of place but tried not to show it. "You sacrificed everything for me," she'd say when I tried to refuse her help. "Let me give something back." Life was good, better than I'd ever imagined it could be after those dark early years. I was 51. Still working but able to ease up a bit. Sarah was successful and happy. We talked on the phone every few days, had dinner together once a week. I'd survived, and more than that, I'd built something beautiful from the ashes of my old life. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Eleanor Mitchell," a woman's voice asked. "Yes, my name is Catherine Morrison. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Margaret Mitchell. I'm calling because Mrs. Mitchell passed away last month, and there are some matters regarding her will that concern you." My heart stopped. Margaret, Thomas's mother, the woman who'd called me a liar, who'd blamed me for her son's death, who'd kept me from his funeral. "I have nothing to say to the Mitchell family," I said, moving to hang up. "Wait, please. Mrs. Mitchell left a letter. She specified it should be delivered to you after her death. And there's a matter regarding her younger son, David Mitchell. He's trying to contest certain parts of her will, and your testimony might be relevant. David, I hadn't thought about him in years, had pushed him so far back in my memory that sometimes I could pretend that whole nightmare had happened to someone else. What does David want? I asked, my voice hollow. Perhaps we could meet in person. There's quite a bit to discuss. I met Catherine Morrison at her office 3 days later. She was a woman in her 40s, professional and efficient, and she handed me a thick envelope with my name written on it in shaky handwriting. Mrs. Mitchell wrote this about a year before she died. Catherine explained. She was diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to set certain things right. I should warn you it's quite lengthy, and the contents may be upsetting. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was 10 pages long, handwritten, and it started with 3 words that broke me. I am sorry. I won't reproduce the entire letter. Here it's too personal, too painful, but I'll tell you what it said. Margaret confessed that about 10 years after Thomas died, David had gotten drunk at a family dinner and admitted what he'd done. Admitted that he'd pursued me, kissed me without consent, threatened me when I rejected him, admitted that he'd lied to the family to cover his own behavior. I didn't want to believe him. Margaret wrote, for years, I convinced myself he was drunk, that he was joking, that he couldn't possibly have done such a thing. But the truth kept eating at me. I watched David over the years, watched him go through 3 marriages, each one ending because he couldn't remain faithful, watched him lie to his own children, manipulate people for his own gain, and I realized that you'd been telling the truth all along. She wrote about the guilt that consumed her, about how she'd destroyed an innocent young woman's life because she couldn't face the truth about her son. She wrote about Thomas, about how she poisoned him against me, and how she believed that guilt had made him reckless in his work, distracted, which contributed to the accident that killed him. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter concluded. I don't deserve it. I destroyed your marriage, turned my son against you, left you pregnant and alone, and branded you a liar. I've spent the last decade watching David destroy himself and everyone around him, and I finally understand what I did to you. You were just a girl, trying to do the right thing, and I punished you for it. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm so deeply, truly sorry. It's too late for me to make this right, but I've made changes to my will. David gets nothing. What I have left, I'm leaving to your daughter, Thomas's daughter, the granddaughter I never knew. I hope this small gesture can begin to repay the debt I owe you. I sat in that lawyer's office and sobbed. Decades of pain, of anger, of questions, all coming to the surface at once. I'd been telling the truth. Margaret had finally admitted it, but the admission came 30 years too late, delivered by a lawyer because the woman hadn't had the courage to face me while she was alive. How much? I finally asked, wiping my eyes. I'm sorry. How much is she leaving, Sarah? The estate, after taxes and expenses, is valued at approximately $1.2 million. The farm was sold years ago, and Mrs. Mitchell had been living off investments and her late husband's pension. She was quite frugal. $1.2 million. A fortune, money that could have helped when Sarah was young, when we were struggling, when I was working 3 jobs and could barely afford food. And David is contesting this. Catherine nodded. He's claiming undue influence. Says his mother wasn't in her right mind at the end. He's demanding the estate be split between you and him as the surviving family members. He wants half. Yes, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course he does. He's always wanted what wasn't his. The legal battle took 8 months. David fought viciously, hiring expensive lawyers, dragging Sarah and me through depositions, trying to paint Margaret as senile, and me as a manipulative gold digger who'd somehow influenced her from a distance. I had to tell Sarah everything, every terrible detail of what had happened before she was born, why we'd been alone all her life, why she'd never met her father's family. She was furious not at me, but at all of them. How could they, she kept saying, how could they treat you that way? How could Dad not believe you? Your father loved his family, I said gently. Sometimes love makes us blind. That's not love, Mama. That's cowardice. She wasn't wrong. The case went to court, and I had to face David for the first time in 30 years. He'd aged badly. He was only 52 but looked closer to 70, with a bloated face and thinning hair. 3 divorces and a lifetime of drinking had taken their toll. His eyes, when he saw me, were full of hate and something else, fear. He knew I was telling the truth, had always known, On the stand, I told my story again. Every painful detail, the harassment, the assault, the threats, the lies. David's lawyer tried to discredit me, but I had something I hadn't had 30 years ago: credibility. I had a life I'd built, a daughter I'd raised, a reputation in the community. I wasn't a scared 23-year-old anymore, and I had Margaret's letter. When Catherine read that letter aloud in court, you could have heard a pin drop. Margaret's confession, her admission that David had told her the truth, her guilt over what she'd done, it destroyed David's case. The judge ruled in our favor. The will stood. Sarah inherited everything, and David got nothing. As we left the courthouse, David grabbed my arm. "You ruined my life," he hissed. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. "No, David, you did that all by yourself. I just refused to let you ruin mine." Sarah wanted to give me half the money, but I refused. "Mama, you deserve this. After everything." "I don't want it," I said firmly. "That money comes with too much pain, too many bad memories, but it's yours. Your grandmother wanted you to have it, and you should. Then let me do something for you, please. Anything you want." I thought about it for a long time. What did I want? What had I always wanted? "I want a house," I said finally. "Nothing big or fancy, just a little house with a yard and a porch. Something that's ours, that no one can take away." Sarah found us a beautiful cottage-style house in a quiet neighborhood, with a garden I could plant and a porch swing where I could sit in the evenings. She insisted on paying for it outright, no mortgage, so I'd never have to worry. "It's my turn to take care of you," she said as she handed me the keys. I spent my first night in that house sitting on the porch, watching the sunset and thinking about everything I'd been through. The pain and betrayal, yes, but also the strength I'd found, the resilience, the love. I'd lost my husband and my marriage. I'd lost the family I thought I'd married into. I'd struggled and suffered and scraped by on nothing for years, but I'd won in the end. I'd raised my daughter to be strong, successful, and kind. I'd built a life that was mine, that no one could take from me. I'd survived. That was 15 years ago now. I'm 73, and Sarah is 45, with children of her own, my 2 beautiful grandchildren, who fill my life with joy. Sarah did remarkable things with her inheritance. She paid off my house, set up a trust fund for her children's education, donated generously to causes supporting single mothers, and invested the rest wisely. She didn't let it change her, didn't let it make her soft or entitled. She remained the girl I'd raised, hardworking, compassionate, and grateful for everything she had. David, I heard, died a few years ago. Liver failure, drinking himself to death in a cheap motel room. He'd alienated all 3 of his children, lost everything, ended up alone. When I heard the news, I felt sad, not for him, but for the waste of it all, the waste of a life spent lying and manipulating and hurting people. I never remarried. People asked, especially in those middle years when I was still relatively young, but I never wanted to. Thomas had been my great love, even if he'd failed me in the end, and I'd learned to be complete on my own, to not need another person to feel whole. These days, I spend my time gardening, volunteering at the library where Sarah and I used to spend our Saturdays, and spoiling my grandchildren absolutely rotten. They know the story. Sarah told them an age-appropriate version, and they ask me questions sometimes. "Grandma, were you scared when you were raising Mama alone?" my eldest grandchild asked me recently. "Terrified," I admitted, "every single day. But being scared doesn't mean you don't do what needs doing. It just means you're brave enough to do it anyway." "You're the bravest person I know," she said, hugging me tight. Looking back now, with the wisdom that only comes from surviving and thriving, I understand some things I couldn't see when I was in the middle of the storm. I understand that Thomas was weak, not evil. He loved me, but he loved his family more, and he couldn't reconcile the two. When forced to choose, he chose wrong, and it cost him everything, including his life. In a way, the guilt and confusion made him reckless, careless, and it killed him. I understand that Margaret lived with her guilt for decades, that it ate at her until she couldn't bear it anymore. Her deathbed confession didn't absolve her, but it proved that the truth has a way of surfacing eventually. No matter how deep you bury it, I understand that David was deeply damaged, probably had been long before he targeted me. Hurt people, and he spent his whole life destroying everything he touched, and I understand that. I'm stronger than I ever imagined I could be. That woman who broke down crying on her studio apartment floor, terrified and alone and pregnant, she survived. She got up the next day and the day after that and every day for 30 years. She raised an incredible daughter. She built a life worth living. That woman was me, and I'm proud of her. People ask me sometimes if I'm bitter, if I hate the Mitchell family for what they did to me. The answer is no. Hate is exhausting, and I'm too old to waste energy on it. What they did was terrible. Yes, it shaped my life in ways both devastating and profound, but it didn't break me. In fact, in some strange way, their betrayal made me who I am. It forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I had. It taught me that I could survive anything. It showed me that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. And that's not a pessimistic thought. It's a liberating one. If I could go back and change things, would I? That's the question that haunts me sometimes in the quiet hours of the night. Would I warn my younger self, tell her to run from that construction worker who walked into her father's store? Tell her not to marry Thomas, not to let David move in? I don't think I would, because changing the past would mean Sarah wouldn't exist, and I can't imagine a world without her. Every hardship, every tear, every sleepless night was worth it to have her in my life. She's my proudest accomplishment, my greatest joy, my legacy. The scars remain, of course. I still flinch when someone stands too close behind me. I still have moments of distrust, wondering if people's kindness has ulterior motives. I still have dreams sometimes where I'm back in that apartment, David advancing on me, and I wake up with my heart pounding. But scars are proof that you survived something that tried to destroy you. They're badges of honor, not marks of shame. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, who's been betrayed by people they trusted, who's facing the world alone, who's struggling to survive, want you to know this. You can do it. I know it feels impossible. I know you're scared and tired and you don't know how you're going to make it through another day, but you will. One foot in front of the other, one day at a time, one small victory after another. You'll build a life from the ruins. You'll discover you're stronger than you ever imagined. And someday, years from now, you'll look back and be amazed at what you survived. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. I raised my child alone, and in the process, I raised myself. I bloomed in soil that should have been barren. I thrived when I should have withered, and if I could do it, so can you. My story isn't one of revenge or bitterness or holding on to grudges. It's a story of survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and child. It's proof that even when the people who should protect you become your enemies, even when you lose everything, even when the world seems determined to crush you, you can still win. Not by destroying those who hurt you, but by refusing to let them destroy you. That's my story. That's my truth. And that's my gift to anyone who needs to hear it. You are stronger than you know. You can survive anything. And on the other side of that survival is a life more beautiful than you can imagine. The sun is setting now, painting my little garden in shades of gold and amber. Sarah is coming for dinner with the grandchildren. I can hear them pulling up in the driveway, hear their excited voices calling Grandma. Grandma, this is my life now. This is what I built from nothing. This is what they tried to take from me and failed. I won, not because I got Margaret's money, or saw David suffer or proved I was right all along. I won because I'm sitting on my porch in my own house, waiting to hug my grandchildren, living a life full of love and peace and joy. I won because I survived. And sometimes, survival is the greatest victory of all.